Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Hey, of course, I'm getting all ready to go and I'm all set and ready to hit the play and all that good stuff. And then all of a sudden, I get a notice from YouTube here saying, hey, we may not be having a good enough connection to stream properly. You got to love it, right? So I want to make sure, can you all see and hear me okay? I've gone ahead and put that notice out there, but even looking right now, I can see that things look pretty darn shaky. So I want to see how we're looking before we get started here, because gosh, I want to make sure that you have a good experience here. Hope everything's all right for you on this Thursday afternoon if you're watching live. And if you're watching later on, I hope everything's going fantastic for you. Looks like we're still having some streaming issues. So let's make sure that everything is working before we get going here. So let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Otherwise, I will restart and we'll try this again. Okay, sound is good. Video is a little jumpy, says Price. Thank you, Price. I appreciate that. I think if it's okay with you guys, I will go ahead and start since the audio is good. That's what matters most. And here in a moment, I am going to switch to a PowerPoint presentation. So it won't be quite as bad that the video is a little jumpy. Kaysville City, hey, I know Kaysville City, says it was choppy but a little bit better now. And in fact, the data stream that I see right here says that things are better. So, well, you guys know as well as anybody else that sometimes services and utilities are available and sometimes they're not. Well, you know what, everyone? Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for having me again. I really enjoy this. I love working with you guys. I love working with Maria, and I've had some great conversations with many of you since the training we did on diversity. And today we get to explore another very interesting topic. Yes, ethics. And you're like, hold it, I thought you said it was a very interesting topic. It is, I promise, okay? Here's the thing about ethics, and I say this here on the title slide. You know the word ethics, you come across it all the time, but if push comes to shove, you might have a difficult time defining it. Oftentimes we might say, well, ethics is doing the right thing. Well, yeah, but what's the right thing? The moral thing? No, not really. So, what we're going to do today is we are going to define ethics. Now, there's a few ways we're going to do this. First of all, I'm going to compare ethics to some other constructs with which you are very, very familiar so that we can juxtapose them and say, okay, this is what ethics is, this is what it isn't. We're going to explore some theories of ethics, but then we're going to get to the nuts and bolts of it. We're going to talk about what it means to us in our jobs as we serve our communities and what makes for ethical decision making. Okay, so by the time we're done here, you'll have a much deeper understanding of what ethics are, but more importantly, you will know how to begin to apply them as you serve your communities. Okay? So with that, let's play. Let's come over here. I'm going to start off with a dictionary definition. This is the least interesting part, but it'll start us on the right direction. A dictionary definition of ethics are standards of behavior. Okay? Ethics is all about behavior. It tells us how we as human beings ought to conduct ourselves in the various situations in which we find ourselves. Okay? As friends, parents, children, citizens, business people, teachers, professionals, public servants, and so on. The idea is that ethics apply to us in different ways depending on how we are conducting ourselves in the community. So let's compare ethics with some other aspects so that we can get a deeper understanding of what they are. Um, let's first talk about, say, values. A value. Now, a value is a personal guiding principle, such as I always try to tell the truth. Okay? I always try to tell the truth. That's a personal value, and therefore that guides me in what I do. However, that's not ethics. Okay? Well, then let's go down and look at morals. A moral is a value that's codified by the community. So it's like a community, like you guys, look around and say, hey, you try to tell the truth? You try to tell the truth? Well, I try to tell the truth. You know what? We as a community would really benefit if we all tried to tell the truth. So you know what? We ought to codify it. Now, oftentimes when we talk about codifying, it's in the context of, say, religion. You know, Ten Commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness, right? But those still aren't ethics. All right. Well, then what about laws? Okay. Now, a law is when we have something that can be enforced with consequences. It's not a personal value anymore. It's not even a codified moral. It's something that we have said, you know what, this is important enough to the community that we are going to enforce it, and we are going to place consequences on those who choose to go against it. Okay? Now, then what's ethics? All right? Well, ethics, and this is the big one, is the best thing to do given the circumstances. And so while there might be laws regarding, libel, slander, and perjury, ethics is what causes a parent to tell their kid, yeah, there is a Santa Claus. Okay? Now, here's the thing. By telling a kid that there's a Santa Claus, spoiler alert, you're not telling the truth. You're bearing false witness. You're, libeling yourself. And, it just goes against everything else. And yet, as a parent, we might choose to say that this is the ethical direction to go. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Just because something is ethical doesn't mean it's legal. And just because something is legal does not mean it's ethical. All right? Those are different things. I'll give you an example. Here in November, we're going to be going to the polls to vote, and we're going to be voting on Proposition C. Okay? Well, Proposition C is, hey, should we amend our Constitution to remove the language regarding slavery? Right now in the Utah Constitution, you can put somebody in slavery if they, violate certain laws and so on and so forth. Well, that means that in Utah, it's constitutional to practice slavery. Would anybody ever consider doing it? Not in 1,000 years. Nevertheless, it's constitutional law, but it's highly unethical. Highly unethical. Okay? So that's why we want to kind of look at what are the differences between values, morals, laws, and ethics. Ethics are the best thing to do given the situation. Okay? So, why do we care about this? Because we live in a constant world of ethical dilemmas. Okay? An ethical dilemma is damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're between a rock and a hard place. Okay? So, for example, should you open schools during the COVID pandemic? That's an ethical question. So on one extreme, you go, why on earth would you think it's a good idea to put a whole bunch of germ infested kids into a small room for 8 hours a day or however long it is, right? In a pandemic, that's nuts. Well, on the other hand, you also have parents saying, just so you guys know, I can't homeschool 24/7. I have a job. I cannot afford childcare. Even the childcare places are closed. I need to work. I need to get to work. I don't have the greatest connectivity. Even if my kids can do online school, then we have issues like we're experiencing right now with poor connectivity with this session. It is not a viable educational or economic solution for me. Both sides have a point. Therefore, it is an ethical decision, an ethical dilemma. There is no one easy answer to something like, should we open the schools? Okay? So, before we continue on, I notice that we're still having issues. And so I want to make sure, are you still seeing and hearing me? Because I see we're having issues. I expect I received a phone call from Maria saying we're having issues on our side, and I probably am on my side as well. I want to make sure that we're still getting this through okay. So do me a favor there and chime in, anyone at all, and let me know if this is still coming through, because I want to make sure that we cover this stuff properly. Hopefully we're getting more people jumping on. So let me see if everybody can still see and hear me. Maria, okay. See and hear you great. Maria just sent me a text. Hey, Matthew, thank you so much. You know, we plan for the best, right? But things fall through. So thanks for being patient with this. You guys are killing it. Okay, so let's talk about ethical models. Now, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you 5 of many, 5 ethical models, explain what they are, explain how they work, how they don't work. But then I'm going to talk about, hey, thanks, Maria. I'm going to talk about what it means to you as a public servant, okay? Because if we don't talk about how it applies to you, then why are we going through this? All right. So first one, here's a couple of quotes from you. You'll recognize it. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. If you're old and cool like me, you know that Spock said that. Or another quote you might be familiar with. It is better that one man should perish than that a nation should dwindle and perish in disbelief. These are both examples of the utilitarian or common good approach. Now, the idea of the utilitarian or common good approach says that the most ethical course of action is the one that creates the greatest good for as many people as possible and the least amount of harm to as few people as possible. Okay? So remember, ethics are all about ethical decision making when you're in an ethical dilemma, in loggerheads. No one solution is the best way to go. Okay? So here's the thing. We need to then decide, well, what's the best course of action? The utilitarian or common good approach says, well, whatever you can do that creates the most amount of good, go that way, so long as it does the least amount of harm. So, for example, my wife is an X-ray technologist. She's the one who takes X-rays, right? Well, here's the thing about X-rays, folks. They're dangerous. They're harmful. They will mess you up. Luckily, when you get an X-ray done, the dose is really, infinitely small, and the technologist knows what they're doing, and so on and so forth. So you're fine. Get your X-rays. Get take care of yourself. But it's not zero risk. Any medication, any prescription is not zero risk. However, we have decided that the amount of good that comes from taking your medication and getting an X-ray and so forth far outweighs the bad. Okay? Therefore, that works from, say, a medical standpoint. That's why doctors can prescribe medication that, in fact, is pretty nasty stuff, but on whole, it will help you. That is the common good or utilitarian approach. So here's the thing, though, and all of these approaches have problems. We're going to explore them all. It really kind of, it conflicts for a whole variety of reasons. One is it conflicts with individualism, kind of forcing everybody to be a member of the collective. If all the decisions that are made favor the most amount of good for the collective, then that means that individually there will be losers, right? And, none of us want to be a loser, right? None of us want to have to wait patiently for something or another. It also fails to take into account the considerations of justice. Sometimes what is the most utilitarian common good approach may be unjust to somebody else, but strict utilitarianism doesn't really consider that. So, for example, face masks are a great example of the common good approach. Wearing a face mask is the best thing to do for the community, even though it inconveniences the individual. So, as an ethical guideline for you as a public servant, whatever solution creates the greatest good while causing the least amount of harm, that's the solution you want to choose. Now, recently you had some windstorms, right? Oh, yeah. Wasn't that great? You had some windstorms, which means you had to, you had power issues and so forth. Now, I do not know if Kaysville is responsible for making sure power is up and running. That might be a county thing. I do not know. But I do know that in Salt Lake and so forth, they were getting the power up and running on the lines that had the most amount of homes on it. So in other words, if you were on a power grid that had 1,000 homes, they'd get your power up right away. Whereas if you were on a power grid that had 10 homes, you had to wait. That is classical common good decision-making approach for, say, public service. Okay? All right, so that's one. Let's look at the rights-based approach. Okay? You know the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law, no person shall be held, right to a speedy trial, the powers reserved to the states. The rights-based approach is all about individual rights. The most ethical action is the one that best protects and respects the moral rights of those affected, okay? It goes on the basis that we all have dignity as individuals. We should not have to suppress our individual dignity in the cause of the collective. So this is kind of the other side of the utilitarian approach. And so, for example, in my case, I feel strongly in my right to free speech. That's a constitutionally guaranteed right. I feel strongly in the right to free speech. And here's the thing, though. Free speech is really, 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 really powerful and can be potentially insanely dangerous. I mean, insanely dangerous. And yet I believe in it fervently. Okay, I do not believe in the right of a government or a collective or an individual or an organization to suppress my right to vocalize in some way or another that which is in my head. You're not allowed. That's a very rights-based approach because I have that right. Now, here's the thing. Once again, this approach has issues as well. We don't really agree on what we have the right to. This is a constant source of angst for us as a community. I have the right to free speech. Does that mean I have the right to offend? Yep. Well, now hold on, Lon. A month or two ago, you talked to us about diversity and you said that we need to be careful about how we approach things and how we offend. Oh, yeah, totally, 100%. Just because I think you have the right to do something doesn't mean I think you need to exercise it, especially for malicious intent. But then these debates go on and on. You know, you take, for example, gun rights. Yes, by using the rights approach of ethical decision making, you have a constitutional right to firearms and dude out there on the range, right? So, as an ethical decision making paradigm, whatever solution best protects established individual rights of the citizen is the approach you should take. Now, for those of you playing at home, you're already noticing, well, now hold on, Lon, the utilitarian or common good approach kind of sits in stark, contrast to the rights approach. Yep. I didn't say that this was easy. This is why ethical decision making really takes us to, is requires us to really consider these issues deeply and consider them carefully. And I've just done 2. Let's do 3. Fairness approach. All men are created equal. We want equal fairness, right? Well, so the fairness approach says the most ethical action are those that treat everybody equally. Or if not equally, then there's some standard against which we can agree that no, that should not be equal. So, for example, my father-in-law was an airline pilot. He's retired now. But in his own words, he said, I'm a glorified bus driver. Now, when you really think about it, a pilot performs the exact same work as a bus driver. The only difference is the altitude. You cram a whole bunch of people into a metal object and ship them. Well, that altitude thing, that actually makes a big difference. The risk involved for an airline pilot is much, much, much greater than a bus driver. So bus drivers should be paid well, but because airline pilots take on substantially more risk, they should be remunerated to reflect that. But in in this egalitarian approach, then we really want to make sure that we treat people as equally as possible. The problem is we can't. What is equal? What does equal mean? It's a really, really tough nut to crack. But think about it this way. As an ethical decision-making guideline, you would want to say whatever solution delivers the most equal services is the best solution. So, for instance, here in the United States, things like power and water, utilities, and so forth are more or less a government run. Yes, I know it's this blend between the public and private sector, but we have really worked hard in this country to make sure that everybody has equal access to electricity, to gas, to water, to roads, to sewage, all the things that we've kind of sat back and said, you know what, in order for us to create a level playing field for everybody to succeed, we need to make sure that everybody has equal access to these resources. And you guys as a city have to deal with this all the time. You have a bunch of services that you provide, and you'll have limited reach and limited money, limited funds. How do you ensure that all of these resources are applied equally? Well, now, if we follow this decision-making model, we try to find the very best solution based on the need for equality. Okay? All right, number 4. Kantian ethics or categorical imperative. These things have all these fancy academic names because academics like to feel they're important. But still, this one is basically comes down to the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You're very familiar with this. Therefore, this one says that the most ethical course of action for you to take is the one that you can envision everybody taking, and you're totally copacetic with it. You're totally fine. So you can do something so long as you are really comfortable and are fine with the idea of everybody else in the world doing that. Okay? So, an example from my side, I served an LDS mission. I know I'm supposed to say the whole thing now, but I served an LDS mission in Japan. Therefore, I feel that because I believe in Kantian ethics, since I spent 2 years asking people to allow me into their home to discuss things of a spiritual matter, I am under an ethical obligation to accept other people into my home to discuss things of a spiritual nature. So if the Jehovah's Witnesses or whomever comes to my door, I always let them in because, hey, if I'm going to say that I had an ethical right to do what I do, I need to reciprocate that. So what does this mean for you guys in a city? Oh, by the way, yeah, here's the problem with this one. People tend to be more lenient on themselves and harsher on others. We want justice for those who have wronged us, but mercy for ourselves. It's like when we're driving along and you see some driving insane and cutting people off, and you're like, where's a cop when you need one, right? You really hope they get pulled over and book thrown at them. But then when you're in a hurry because something's really awful is really happening and you got to get there fast and your mind is discombobulated and you're driving like a nut, you're really hoping that people will be merciful and patient with you. And if a police officer pulls you over, you hope that they'll be lenient. That's the problem with the Kantian model. We want somebody to throw the book at the perpetrator, but we want mercy for ourselves if we're the perpetrator. Now, in the case of this as an ethical decision-making model, if you are asking your citizens to do something and you are perfectly happy to do it yourselves as well, and you think everybody should be fine with this, then what you're asking is considered ethical by the Kantian model. So, for example, I love nice, clean neighborhoods. Oh, and I love nice, clean neighborhoods. The lawn well kept, manicured, nice bushes, so on and so forth. Do I feel that I have the ethical right to hope and ask my neighborhood to maintain their homes nicely? Yes, I totally do, because I feel they have the same right to ask that of me. And goodness knows that my weekends and my bills to Home Depot will testify that I work a lot in my yard. So when we ask those in our community to do things, the question is, are you willing to sign up for that yourself? And are you fine with everybody doing it? Okay, last one, number 5. This is the virtue approach. Written under Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send me those homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. The virtue approach is kind of us living in our highest sense of self, what we aspire to be, not what we really are. In all honesty, but what we aspire to be. So in this case, ethical actions ought to be consistent with certain ideals and virtues that we hold among ourselves. So the idea is, if you do something, does it truly reflect your highest ideal of yourself? Not, have you done it before? Do you think it's, yeah. It's, if you envision your perfect, most idealized, virtuous self, would your virtuous self do this? And if the answer is no, then that course of action is considered unethical. If your answer is yes, then boom, you have your answer. Okay? So the way I like to, okay, so I'll give you an example. I give a small amount to many charities myself. My logic being that if everyone gave a smallest amount to whatever charities they like, then everything would take care of itself because there would be plenty of money out there. I can't control what others do, but I give in such a way that I can justify for myself the feeling that I am a just, generous, charitable, virtuous person. Okay. So that's what I tell myself. If everybody gave by the way, I only give this much. I'm not made of money, right? But I do give. And I tell myself, if everybody gives like I gave, we would be okay. All right. Because even 1 penny times a million is a lot, right? Okay. Now, in this case, a problem, we can't decide on what's virtuous. I could read that spiel underneath the Statue of Liberty, and a lot of people can say, I disagree that I necessarily need to hold up to that level in order to be considered virtuous. Or I can even say, you know what, I believe that some of those things are not virtuous, that we should not practice those things. So we have a really hard time agreeing on what constitutes virtuous. But in terms of an ethical decision-making model for you guys going forward, here's what I would say. Whatever solution you would freely share with your community as your mother is watching, that's the right solution. The idea is, if your mother were watching you do something, would she be pleased? If the answer is yes, then you're doing the right thing ethically. If the answer is, ooh, my mother's watching, then maybe not so much. And it's the same thing when it comes to public service. If a reporter comes into your face with a camera and a microphone and says, what's your logic behind why you did this? Why did you do this? And you answer, and you're able to look into that camera, look at the reporter, and say, hey, all things considered in in this ethical dilemma, we made the right choice. And if you can say that feeling strong about your position, then yes, that is the right choice for you. Okay, so that's a major quick run through, and a little quicker than I had anticipated. I had planned because I just got so kerflumped by our connectivity being funky. Connectivity looks pretty good right now, so we're all right. But all of these things come down to, and we're not going to go deep into this right now, all these come down to a code of ethics. Now, here's the idea. If you think about it, I said earlier that ethics are all about making the best decision, not the right decision. Remember, there is no right decision when we have an ethical dilemma. It's about making the best decision of a whole bunch of bad options. Open schools, don't open schools. Both are bad options. You got to do one of them, right? Well, these things differ from whatever, sort of position we're inhabiting at that moment. In other words, as a teacher, I am responsible for following a certain code of ethics. As a journalist, they are responsible for following a certain code of ethics. My wife works in medicine. She is responsible for following a certain published code of ethics. Now, that doesn't mean that all codes of ethics are necessarily published and referenceable and so forth. Parents need to follow a code of ethics. But that code of ethics is kind of up to us to decide for ourselves based on all the things that we just talked about. Now, in your case, codes of ethics in the workplace really talk about things like workplace code of conduct, what is considered appropriate behavior in your workplace, in terms of coming on time, dress, how you interact with others, harassment, your behavior in the workplace. And in fact, later on in this series that we're doing, we will talk about different types of harassment. This all comes down to a workplace code of conduct. Do you have a code of ethics that covers code of conduct? Then we have conflict of interests. Now, this one's big for you guys, right? This is what everybody is always going on about with public servants, is, transparency and conflict of interest. Well, now, this is a real concern. Take, for example, bribery. Well, now, is bribery unethical? Yeah. Yes, by the way, it's unethical. But how would we say bribery is unethical based on the models we've seen? So, for example, utilitarian or the common good approach could say, if all I have to do is give a $100 bribe and I can help all these people, that's totally worth it. Yeah, but watch. How about Kantian or the categorical imperative? That's the code of ethics that says that if you're going to say you can do it, you have to be totally cool and copacetic with everybody doing it. Now, Kaysville is a nice little city. You've got you're sweet, right? You've got yourself a great community. You've got a good, strong tax base. You have good industry, bedtown to some extent, but then you're bringing in a lot of industry. But let's face it, you're not New York. You're not Chicago. You're not LA. You're not even Salt Lake, right? So now if you're competing to bring business into Kaysville and you know that everybody can offer bribes to companies that come on in, that puts you at a distinct disadvantage. And so, no, something like bribery would work very much against, the vast majority of people. Therefore, even from a utilitarian standpoint, it would be unethical. So that's where we kind of connect a practice such as bribery and conflict of interest with things like categorical imperative and utilitarian approach. Use of organizational assets. Yeah, you guys have lots of assets. You have trucks. Use a truck to help a friend move. No. Unethical, inappropriate. Okay. Well, is that included in your code of ethics? And then bribery and corruption, as we just talked about, right? So one of the things that you may want to do is consider, does Kaysville have a published, set up code of ethics that covers such things as these? Now, by the way, if you don't, you're not the only people on the face of the planet that don't. It's really common not to, right? But if you don't, it's something you really ought to give some consideration to. Your HR department especially would love it if you did, okay? But at the very least, I hope that what I was able to give you today is some sort of construct that you can look at when you are faced with an ethical dilemma. Your citizens, your constituents, your coworkers, your managers, they are going to come to you every day, all day, asking you for things for which there is no one good, right answer. Most of the time, you're going to have to give the lesser of two evils. Well, how do you decide and determine the lesser of those two evils? Hopefully, today's conversation has given you some ideas on how to measure those. Okay? So that's everything that I wanted to go over today. Now, one thing I'd like to do is kind of remind you on how you can set yourself up to, we're going to discard this, get credit, as it were, for attending today and watching. And once again, I really apologize for the technical errors. You guys are a city, so you know that I can't control that, but it sure makes me feel bad. So I'll have to make it up to you. Maria, let's talk. I'm going to make it up to you guys. Okay. You'll come out to nutshellbrainery.com and you'll go to courses. This is the same thing you did for the diversity training. Click on courses there, and that is going to bring you to the training on ethics. We'll go ahead and click here. I had to change that. And you take the quiz. The quiz is so easy. It's the same thing as you did on the diversity. It's like 3 questions, and one, 3 questions are things like, what's your first name, what's your middle name, what's your last name. I mean, it's not that simple, but it's really straightforward and simple. Take the quiz, get certified, all that. Let Maria know that you're all set, and you are totally good to go. So with that, I wanted to see if there are any questions. It's been pretty quiet here in the comments section. I see Maria chiming in. Thank you, thank you. Any questions, any comments, concerns or anything, let me know there. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up on the video portion, right? But I'll stick around in the comments section for a while to see if anybody wants to chat or if you have any questions. All right. Once again, thank you very much. And hopefully we can talk to you again real soon. We'll see you later.